Welcome back to another episode of Searching for McGuffin with your hosts,
George?
Gabe. Oh, I guess I'm and Gabe.
Yeah, I
keep
think you're
forgetting that.
and. Yeah, I think you're supposed to.
There's like a hole. There's like a vacant emptiness in my life.
Really? I feel complete.
I'm happy for you. Did you have a good day at work?
Let's not talk about that. Let's talk about bats.
That was smooth.
I know.
Like wooden bats, aluminum bats.
No. Oh, yeah, aluminum, yeah. I think.
What
That's
are they?
use now?
Oh, you're
I
talking
think
about
they
bats.
used
I
to-
was thinking about like batarangs.
Oh, like the one
What do
right
you think-
here in front of
What do you
me?
think? What do you think Batman uses in his batarangs?
A polycarbon metallic alloy.
That works for me.
Does that sound right?
You could have just said metal, and I would have been like, all right, fine.
All right, so for the next couple of weeks, we're going to be focusing on something near and dear to our heart, and that is Batman, his family, his foes, and one rival in particular. But this week, we want to get started by exploring the man, the myth, the legend himself, Bruce Wayne. Today's episode is titled The Batmen, which is an interesting title, Gabe. Why do you think we went ahead and chose The Batmen as this week's episode?
Well, I'll be honest. I probably should have put on my glasses because this whole time I thought that said Batman.
Oh.
And now I'm reading it does say Batmen. But I can only surmise as to the popularity of this character and just the amount of iterations in different forms, in different mediums that this character has. And yeah, I really like that.
Yeah.
Batman.
So it's just interesting that this one singular character, which we've talked about before, different forms of media, different types, it has its origin in the comic books. As the years have progressed on the show, I think our love for characters like this comes from the original text, but I think we're inundated with the media that we tend to focus on those. And sometimes I feel so disconnected from not the history of Batman, because I think we've all read the canonical, like, must-read titles, but I don't think any of us has really kept up with the past maybe decade or two, right, of Batman stories.
Yeah, like the newer stuff. I mean, I think with like newer comics, I think just because there's such like a backlog for me, and it like comics isn't something that it's like I'm doing like once a week. It's every like, oh, I'm in the mood, like let's read some. I feel like there's so many iconic and incredible stories that it's like I'll just go back to one of those, you know? It's not something that I keep up with, like a new season of television that I'm like, oh, a new season's out, then we got to just watch this or read this, you know, as if I would like a TV show week to week. And that's pretty much for any comic. But I think this comic in particular, I think he's just has such a rich history that it's like, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, you know? But I mean, I haven't read any of the new stuff. Have you?
I mean, I think the last time I checked out a Batman title was the New 52, which was, man, I'm not even going to look up the date now, but it's been at least a decade, I think it feels like. Maybe you do want to fact check that.
Yeah, that was like 2012?
Yeah, so we're over a decade now, right? I tried to hold on to those books like 2011. Okay, so wow, that's significantly more. We're about to hit 2025, so it's like going to be 14 years. I like Scott Snyder's stuff in those runs, and I fell off kind of when those runs started coming to an end. I've checked out different books like Metal and what's that other one? Oh, The Last Night, I think is what it's called. It's another Snyder book, and I didn't connect with them as well, and that's pretty much the only things I've checked out because they've rebooted and revamped, and I think it's what you said. Even for an older fan, just like new fans, there's a barrier of entry in the sense that you feel overwhelmed by all the weight of its history. And that's just where I'm at with comic books now. That's my relationship. Like you said, go back and read a classic, but I'm not really gravitating towards being told a new tale. It has to kind of span the test of time. And it's funny, our relationship with media, because that's kind of how I do literature. I don't tend to read a lot of new stuff. Sometimes, especially you, will like be this new thing. Hey, I got a friend told me about this, so I'll check out a book. Or they're like adapting it to a movie, so let me rush to read it before the visual,
but
rhetoric
has
of
to
film.
be there has to be a catalyst for it to become relevant.
Exactly. And that's kind of where I am. And it's interesting, like TV, you're more trendy. Movies, you're more trendy, even though you tend to look back. And by you, I mean like us. But yeah, you have to be more particular, especially because it's such a vast history and they just pump out titles like crazy. But I think what we're going to focus on today is the media interpretations of that character. Because just like the comic book history, it changes from decade to decade. And I don't feel in tune enough to be like, oh, this is the Batman of the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Yeah.
For me, that character is more defined by how he's presented in media, in the different iterations of it. And I think for me, it starts with the Batman show. I think it's called, what did we say? Batman TV show, Batman the movie, the 66 continuity. I know they refer to it as a 66 now because there's even a comic book continuity that follows the end of that TV show and that original movie, Batman the movie. What was your experience with the Adam West, over the top comical Batman?
I think I often forgot it. I forgot about that Batman. I think obviously we're going to talk about the other titles that I was introduced with.
No, you can just go into it. We don't have to travel through them chronologically. So.
I was just I was introduced.
What was your first Batman?
It was probably the animated series.
Okay.
Yeah, as far as I can remember, Batman the animated series, like him in the gray suit, yellow belt, like that is just like, that's like to me what sticks out. And I think obviously as I get older, the popularity of like watching him live action, I think the first Batman movies I saw were the Keaton movies, or the Keaton films.
Yeah. For me, that's my first Batman. Batman 89 was one of the first VHSs I owned. Batman Returns was one of the movies that I saw in the theater first. And to me, Batman the Animated Series was an extension to that. The similar musical themes, the big yellow logo, the fact that when they go into Joker's history, like it says his name used to be Napier. I would try to connect those things. And to me, that was Batman. And then, like you said, I was introduced to 66 later on.
Yeah, and I think that like seeing the more comical aspect, I think I just brushed it off as like, oh, it was back in the day, like it was a different time, and it's like, I don't know, I felt like that was disconnected from the Batman that I knew.
Yeah, I honestly hated it as a kid. I didn't respect it at all because my Batman was gritty and grim and dark, and I didn't recognize this Batman.
Yeah,
I grew to love it as older, but
you look at it, it's like, oh, it's just. Which Batman is a man in tights, but it's like you look at this guy's in a costume, this guy's cosplaying, and
plus you don't understand history too. You don't understand, like, I'm watching a movie now, and this is a show from like 40 years ago.
Exactly, and I think that gets lost a lot, like not just in this, but in any medium. Like if people watch an old movie, I think there's some that it's like, oh, this is incredible, and then it's like I couldn't really get into it, whether it's the lack of color or just the lack of visual effects, special effects and stuff like that. I think people sometimes have a hard time connecting to those types just because they're, so used to what they're seeing nowadays,
Like when you watch Tron for the first time.
It's jarring. It is jarring. No, but I've had people say like couldn't really get into Star Wars because it's just old.
No, those people are wrong. I'm sorry.
And I'm just like, what? It is what it is. As I grow older, I find more patience and
grace
in
right?
my heart. Yeah, exactly. Grace.
But
yeah, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. That Adam West was in some Family Guy episodes.
Yeah, Adam West is like he has a recurring character where he's the mayor of Family Guy.
But he has, I feel like he has some episodes
on his Batman.
Yeah. I feel like he has some Batman, right?
Yeah, because he's so famous. I mean, that's basically, I think, the only thing we really know Adam West. God bless his soul. Rest in peace. He had a lovely full-fledged career, but I think almost everyone just knows him as Batman. So there's a lot of playing on the tropes of the fact that he is Batman, like Adam West. He dresses up and he's constantly refers back to, it's kind of like the running joke on the show.
So I think all those factors led into like it kind of just, being like a joke. It's kind of campy, but I think as you get older, it's like you learn to appreciate it for what it is. Yeah. And you kind of try to find, especially with the character you love, you try to find the good in all of it, if there is any to be found.
Yeah, I mean, there is in that case, because one thing I appreciate about the Adam West Batman is that it is like the seminal depiction of some of the characters at that time. And we grew up with stories like Heart of Ice, which is the origin for Mr. Freeze, and some of those like reiterations of those characters that Paul Dini and Bruce Timm do on Batman the Animated Series. Those characters weren't anything like that before. Even in the comics, Adam West's Batman is a reflection of a lot of those characters at that time and prior. And we're just, like you said, divorced from it. We're just so separate from it that we're like, why are they interpreting the characters this way? But it's a lot closer to those original, imaginings of those characters than the ones that we would grow up with and learn to love.
Yeah. And I mean, even in a sense, there is, because I'm thinking about it now when I think about one of the first introductions, I think, 89 I think was there because obviously you guys are my family and that's your Batman. Pretty much, that was your Batman.
Right? Yeah, that's canon. Like, you must read it.
But also, technically, if we're talking about chronological Batman at the time I was growing up, when I was young and as a kid and being first exposed, it was actually it was Kilmer and Clooney's Batman that I would always see on reruns on Telemundo. And it's like, it's its own form of campiness. It's its own form of being a joke, in a sense. That to me, as a kid, I don't really understand the difference. I was like, oh, this is another Batman. Like, I was confused between it was Kilmer and then it's Clooney.
Batman's almost like James Bond at that time, where you're in a way, he's a bunch of different people.
In a way, I've never thought about it that way, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But like, to me, like, those Schumacher movies are cool. Like, I was like, oh, like, it captured Gotham in this gothic sense that I was like, I haven't really seen
Neo Gotham,
I think. Yeah, and it's like where it's really outlandish. It's like off the pages of like a comic book or something like that.
Yeah,
and
including some of those zanier elements that I think come from that like Silver Age Adam West.
Exactly, and that's connecting those two, where it's like, that might be like what 50 years apart between the two of them or more than that.
No, well, it's like if we're talking 66, and then that's got to be like late 90s, mid to late 90s. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And like Jim Carrey's in the Frank Gorshin, the top hat, suit, and jumpsuit, like both iterations in the same movie.
He's just the guy from The Mask.
Yeah, pretty much. I remember hating Batman Forever. I was super disappointed because that was Batman 3 in my mind. So I did not watch Batman and Robin for a long, long time. And then I got stranded like on a camp trip where like our transportation back home was delayed. So they put us like in a auditorium and they just put on Batman and Robin. And I was like forced to watch Batman and Robin, but I was so bored. And I was like, we're watching a Batman movie like to end camp, that I was like, this is dope. I love it. Like Poison Ivy, Bane. Yeah. Bane's in a movie. He sucks. Like the depiction of Bane is horrible, but just, we were so media starved back then that just to see characters like Bane was a relatively new character from the Nightfall comics in the 90s. That story of him breaking Batman's back was so iconic. It was like that, coupled with the death of Superman, was shaping our understanding of comics at that time. And they were like national events. Everybody knew that Batman got his back broken. Everybody knew that Superman died. And like, comics were cool. And having characters like that depicted on film was like, I'll take it. Like, I never get to see even like an inkling of these stories told to us through other forms of media, and it was exciting to watch. And that's kind of, I made my peace with the rest of the series that way.
Yeah, and I think that goes to like to show that it's easy to bash things. Like, obviously we can critique, and some things aren't to your standards, but I think going back to, you're trying to find the good in everything. And I think for such a long time in my head, it's like, those movies suck. They're not great movies, but I think there's aspects that it's like, okay,
these movies suck, but I bought them like 3 times.
Exactly. It's Batman, like at the end of the day, it's Batman.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like,
it's interesting. You grow up and you find out the truth about stuff like the Schumacher cut for Batman Forever. He had a lot of back and forth with the studio, and a lot of what kind of cuts the vision of what Schumacher allegedly had for that movie is bargaining with the studio at that time. So it's like, even though you may not agree with the vision that he had, even he didn't get to have his full vision, which is kind of like a similar situation with the Snyder Cut. We've talked about it in the past. I'm not a fan of Zack Snyder's, vision, but it's good that we get to see, in a way, it play out with the Snyder Cut, and the people that, believed in that vision get to see it fully fleshed out, because we see how a creator's vision cut, and like bargaining with the studio and having it cut up like they did with the Whedon cut. It doesn't serve anyone, So some of the shortcomings of the film aren't even Schumacher's fault. A lot of people I blamed for those movies: Akiva Goldsman, the screenwriter, Schumacher himself, Val Kilmer, who I think is a great actor. It's not anyone's fault in particular, and sometimes those are just the cards you're dealt.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, once you find more of the backstory of what goes into the making of those films, because making a movie is hard, man.
Yeah.
And props to the people that do, even if like the movies aren't things that I like to watch. Like, I know we have
because I grew up thinking, I would love to make movies, and then I found out what it was to make movies, and I was like, that seems like a ton of work. Maybe I'll just watch them.
Yeah, and so like I have a respect for them. Sometimes something is so atrocious and hideous and terrible that I'm like, why? But at the end of the day, someone, people got up to go to work, and they did the thing, and
yeah,
you gotta look at the bright side, and sometimes, even though it might be very bleak and very just, it's hard to like acknowledge things. I know we bash a lot on Zack Snyder and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And
he's clearly passionate,
He is very passionate, and I've said that before, and I respect that aspect. As far as like him, it's just sometimes that he doubles down on things that I don't like, and I'm just like, all right. I have moments where I'm just like, you can just F yourself, bro. Like,
yeah. Wow, strong. I think we talked about this when we were planning for this episode, and it was the idea that there's certain aspects of Batman. Batman is a man for all seasons. He is whatever this generation, or even this audience within a generation, needs the character to be. But there's certain aspects that we as fans are not willing to negotiate. And I don't mean that as a monolith, like we all agree, because different people have different non-negotiables. We talked about how the no killing rule is kind of one of those strong things. But even then, we said we've put up with it in other cases. I don't know if you remember that conversation that we were having.
Yeah, like I think it's just how it's handled. I think that there's a certain way to handle those certain issues. Like, if there are certain non-negotiables, why? What's the point? Are you doing it just to throw it in the face? Like, oh, I can do this? Then it's like, that's disrespectful, and I don't like being disrespected. Like, as an audience member, I don't like being treated like that. I think if there is a reason, you can find some way. I believe. I mean, if we're going to Ben Affleck, Zack Snyder's Batman, I think that what his line of thinking was that this is a jaded Batman. He's gone through a lot. He's seen a lot. But I think one of the things that makes his character so special is that even in those, like, even going through tough times, even going through the difficult moments, difficult amounts of loss, he doesn't cross that line.
Right.
And I think that's what is obviously so appealing about this character. But sometimes it's just like, all right, we're just gonna deliberately we're gonna put guns, like machine guns, and he's just gonna mow down people, and just run people over and blow them up and just break their necks. I don't know. I feel like when you have so much skill, when you have so much skill, it's easy to it could be easy to kill someone. What makes you skilled is being able to incapacitate somebody. And I think that's also what I loved about, Batman. It's like, he's putting a beating on these guys, he can easily kill people. he can easily just, snap their necks. But it's like he fights in a way where he's doing this to either protect or stop them from doing it. But it's like it's a way to incapacitate the perpetrators.
Yeah, I think most people don't want their heroes to be judge, jury, and executioner because they don't believe that human life should be in the hands of an individual that way. I'm glad that you asked the question, what's the point? That's kind of the question that we're looking to answer this season as we explore these topics. What's the point? Why is it? So we talked about how the burden Batman straps, bombs to a clown and kicks him into a ditch, throws him down a hole. He explodes. I assume he blows up. And just like machine guns on the Batmobile, et cetera, et cetera. But it was a different time. That's not the emphasis of the character that is being, focused on. And it's also kind of like off panel. Like, did he die? Did he not die? Like, obviously he died, but there's so much unrealistic depictions of things in those movies that it's almost like yes or no. There's that moment in Batman Begins, which I think is like the one flaw in Batman Begins, where Bruce says to Ra's al Ghul at the end, I'm not going to kill you, but I don't have to save you. And I was like, but is inaction not a form of action itself? I don't think Batman would do that. But that's my interpretation. It's a loophole for Christopher Nolan in that movie. But I even think it's one that he walks back later on in the series because I think Batman tends to be more proactive in saving people. Like, for example, the Joker in the very next movie, right? Like, Joker could have got himself killed, but he preserves his life. So I think he comes through that journey throughout the films, and that brings us to the Nolan films, which I think we've talked before about, but one of the seminal depictions in film of The Dark Knight, at least in our view.
Oh no, for sure. It's probably on my Mount Rushmore of films. Like, I mean, I don't want to separate them, but it's like as a series, it's up there in trilogies. It's up there as a film.
Yeah,
all three. I have a very fond place in my heart for all three of those films. As far as like the Batman Begins saving Ra's, I think that in a way it's like you look at it, he saves him at the beginning. Like he risks his life to save him at the beginning.
Yeah, made that mistake.
He doesn't. He does. He's like, I'm not doing that again. But at the same time, it's like, in a way, it's like I guess he kind of feels guilty that he saved this man, and now this man is tearing his city apart. Like it's kind of like the taking of Gotham is kind of on him, in a way. And I think that he feels that, especially when he sees kind of Ra's again in his the vision that he sees in Dark Knight Rises, or it's like I kind of feel like it's like it's a bit of a guilty conscience that he sees him again, and he's like, it's not possible. Like, what does he even say? Like, I beat you, or what does he say to him? Like to the ghost of Ra's al Ghul that he sees.
He says, "I love you," and then they kiss.
Does he say I killed you? I don't know. I forgot what he said. But
I don't remember, to be honest. Rewatch time?
Rewatch, definitely.
Producer Nick hasn't seen them. So.
Someone hasn't seen them, so.
Yeah. So we should probably go out of our way. He is flashing the Goku silent meme to me.
Even then, I think in Dark Knight Rises, he sees Ra's, but he also is seeing his city burn from the outside, and also another one of like his shortcomings, his failings, and I think that's something that pushes him. It's just for a character that has this line that tries to live in the black and white. There's so much gray to this character, which is why I find him so, appealing. Why I like watching him. Why I like, experiencing his stories.
Yeah.
If that's the way. And he's just
because those shades of gray fluctuate depending on who's depicting them. Yeah. And there is, as much as we know about this character, because there's so many stories and iterations, there's still an unknown aspect to it, that there's a field of play, so to speak, where you can color in, outside the lines a little bit.
No, and it's so diverse, the amount of like variety that you can have, the aspect of Batman being a crime fighter, him being a superhero, him being part of the Justice League, the video games Arkham, Lego Batman in terms like there's so
Yeah.
many different ways that you can tackle Batman that we've seen like can be very very impactful and very successful and very something that it's like is very enjoyable. And then you have like the other iterations where it's like detective.
Mm-hmm.
I think more modern takes are kind of floating in that direction with
I think because for a long time it's not something that was emphasized during the adaptations from page to media
yeah
to fit whether it be film or even cartoons.
yeah it's
Batman the
more like
animated series balances that too very well. Sometimes they're action heavy episodes, sometimes they're like deductive reasoning. I know that there's other animated series like Brave and the Bold is more like the Adam West, just like Lego Batman. These
mhm.
depictions also helped me kind of understand this comical, jovial, over the top interpretation of the character where it's okay for this character to be fun. It doesn't have to be dreary and dark all the time. But then like there's a Beware the Batman, which is I think is a very underrated series that it focuses a lot on the detective aspect to it. So there's just so much. You mentioned the Justice League as an extension of Batman the animated series.
Mhm.
Him now that grounded Batman that we see for the most part on that series thrust into this bigger world. You know, when he teamed up with Superman, when the Superman animated series and the Batman animated series crossed over for that
Yeah,
like
across the
mini TV movie, I think
mhm.
you had the DVD of that, right?
Yeah.
Of that, yeah. And we just watched those same 3 episodes like over and over and over again.
That was the best thing. Like that was my portals. That was my end game. Like that was because I love those two shows, and to finally have them meet up, it was like you couldn't ask for more than that.
Yeah, and when the world opened up by putting them both in the Justice League animated series and then Justice League Unlimited, it was like
Those
heaven.
shows were
Little did
just
we.
yeah, like those. Oh man, animated is so. I don't want to say underrated because I think people do have, um, people obviously people love those shows,
I
but
think people of that generation do, but I do think it's underrated in the sense that it hasn't been revisited and remarketed to newer audiences in a way that a lot
yeah,
of old stuff that we grew up with has.
that's true.
Yeah, because
And
it's like sitting there on Max, and it's like,
yeah,
kids, you should go watch this.
yeah, because I remember like you're so lucky to have all this content in one place. We used to like I used to borrow DVDs from you or have to like ask people like ask my parents to buy them, get them a Blockbuster or whatever it is. Um, but it's just there's so the different forms, the different mediums of storytelling that we get from this is just so vast. Video games, comics, movies, TV shows, even the music from the world of Batman is impactful
Yeah,
from wherever they come from like you said, the films and stuff like that. The music also tells a story. And I love those soundtracks. I love that there's so many aspects of this character I love, and I think all of that was really brought to the forefront with these new iteration, like these new uh takes on Batman. Like Matt Reeves is the Batman, and also the Cape Crusader TV show on Prime. I think that it's tackling that detective aspect. I love, but also for me, I think that folks specifically focusing on the new Batman film or newer, like what 2 years ago,
yeah, the newest.
it it showed Batman to me in a different light that I didn't know. It's like, man, I've been watching this character. I've been, taking in his stories for almost all of my life, and I still felt like it was taking me to school. I
Which
still
I
felt
didn't think
like
it was possible, to be honest.
exactly.
Especially the Batman film starring Robert Pattinson is closer in tone to the Dark Knight films, I think, than any other films. And
Hmm.
I didn't know if you could go back into that kind of timeline, or rather, that same tone. It's different because it's distinct and it's unique. But if you had to compare it to something, it would be those films. And I didn't know if you could not surpass, but like live up to the expectation to be on that level.
Yeah,
I think they did. Yeah.
I think they knocked it out of the park. I mean, because you think about it, it's like you think about the Dark Knight, one of our favorite movies. How do you how do you get more grounded to that? How do you or work from that?
Yeah.
Like how do you take something like that and try to make something? just as good, if not even better.
Yeah, I think the Arkham.
Yeah.
You touched upon it briefly. The Arkham games do that in an interactive way, which I love that series. And if anyone loves Batman and hasn't experienced, even if you're not a video game person, those should be the video games that you play because that series is just incredible. But it also builds on the animated series because it has Mark Hamill as the Joker. It has, Kevin Conroy as Batman. So it's something familiar. Like, obviously, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
There's a tether there. There's a connection.
Yeah, but there's a tether there. But to start from scratch and rebuild that when we've already seen the apex, whatever that is for you, because not everybody agrees that all of these reach the same levels, but whether the apex is the animated series or whether it's Christian Bale's depiction of the Dark Knight, or whether it's, the Arkham games, to be in that conversation, to elevate the material for a new generation, I think it was a grand achievement.
Yeah, and I'm very excited. And I think that was like we talked about. We had an episode about that, and that was one of the. We had such a good conversation on that episode.
Yeah.
And I think if you haven't heard that episode, I think you should go back and check it out. It's just titled The Batman, and we share our thoughts. And I think you can really sense the energy that we were bringing on that episode. Like after just watching it, it was just so mind blowing in a sense.
Yeah, it was fresh. It was what, like that's 2 years you said now?
Yeah.
It was fresh in our minds at that time, and I think I stand by. It has endured the test of time. That film is still relevant, I think, and I'm looking forward to where that series.
Yeah. I watch it annual. I watch it for me. It's a Halloween movie, so I watch it on Halloween every year, and that's been my tradition, and I've kept it. I mean, we can go back and forth talk about that. But the main thing that I got from that film was just how, in a new light, it showed me that side of Batman. And I think that journey of self-discovery, that as he's, embarking on that, he's in year 2, I believe, in that story.
Yeah, year 2. Yeah.
And
year 1 is the beginning of year 2.
And he has the voiceover. He's giving the monologue where he talks about like wanting to have an effect where he's scaring the criminals to not perform crime, to not do crime. Like he is the shadows, he's vengeance, he's all these things. He's a force, for vengeance is what they call him. They don't even call him really the Batman. Is like they call him vengeance. And he's like this terrible figure that's going to come out and get you, like the boogeyman or something like that. But by the end of the film, and what I think the film does great is just he saves people. He does his detective work, of course, which I love that aspect of it. But it's like he is just a hero and he saves people. And the paramount of his priorities is to save as many people as he can.
Yeah.
And
I think it touches on so many of those like central themes.
Yeah, and it was just how he says he's like, I have had an effect here, but not the one I intended. And he just realized he's a symbol for hope and that he can inspire people to trust, to believe, to have faith. And that goes back to the Dark Knight trilogy, where he's like, sometimes people deserve to have their faith rewarded. And those are just lines that they're just in my head, and I'll just think of them from time to time, which is, tying it back to why these stories are important. When I'm going through a difficult moment, when I'm going through a tough time, and it's like, I think about it might sound silly and stuff, but it's like, those things are those things are very profound to me and that have impacted me. And it's like the way that those stories have been told have helped me in my life and grow as an individual and grow as a person and make me have faith in other people and in myself and just have hope for that I can do better, that other people can do better. And that's what I thoroughly enjoyed about this film is I didn't think about, Batman in that way. Batman's always been the badass, the Dark Knight, he's been the crime fighter, the Cape Crusader. He is the guy, he has so many names. And it's just to find another take that I think was very refreshing at that point in my life has been something that I've been able to take. So it's like people ask you who's your Batman, and I'm like, man, it's like I love Christian Bale. Christian Bale's the one I grew up with. Christian Bale's my guy. Robert Pattinson knocked it out of the park, and I think the story just was executed beautifully, and I'm excited to see where that goes.
It'll always be Michael Keaton for me. Producer Nick said it was Ben Affleck, but why is it that we gravitate towards this character? Why is it that he is, like you said, all these titles that he carries, all these Batmen that he is throughout the years? I think it's that. I think it's faith in the human spirit. I think we're all drawn to it. Little boys looking up to this figure that is an impossible feat to achieve, and yet that's what we strive for. We strive for excellence. We struggle with the dichotomy of darkness and evil. In order to push society forward, we have to make the hard decisions, but we can't lose our soul in that struggle. Sometimes, and this from the Dark Knight films, you need someone that's willing to put their hands in the dirt, right? And we can associate that through the character of Batman. And these are just ideals that they stay with us, right? They're inculcated into us when we're young. And if we really gravitate to characters and stories like this, it's something that, it's like you said, it sounds stupid, but it really does shape your morality and your like compass. It's a guide. Like, what would Batman do in this situation? How can I be more like Batman? And obviously, he's just a myth. He's just a legend. He isn't real, but we'd like to think that we could be a better man. And Batman is a better man, a man for all seasons.
Beautifully said.
And on that note, we'll continue this conversation next week, because now that we've talked about the man, the myth, and the legend, no man is an island. And we'll take a look at the Bat Fam to come.
Have a great week, everyone.